Back when I was a kid, I had this friend in elementary school. We were super close, sat next to each other in class, hung out every recess and lunch. So, at one point, we planned a little sleepover. My parents' place was kind of small at the time, but she lived in this big old house with her grandparents, so it was arranged we'd have our sleepover there instead. I never found out why she lived with them or where her parents were, but I distinctly remember my mom and dad telling me not to ask her questions about them for obvious reasons in hindsight. The only thing was, my friend seemed really set on having the sleepover at my place. I mean, to the point where, when we had no choice but to have it at her grandparents' place, she seemed to not want to have a sleepover anymore. I had to convince her to have it at her place just because I was so excited about the idea of having the sleepover in general. Anyways, it comes to the night of the sleepover. I go over to her grandparents' place and it's every bit as fun as I imagined. We watched movies up in her room, had pizza delivered, ate ice cream right out of the tub, and her grandparents seemed really sweet and nice. Then I think it was around 9 p.m. Her grandpa knocks on the door, pokes his head in and tells us that he and my friend's grandma are headed to bed, so we're to keep the noise down. We're like, okay, good night. He leaves, and we carry on with our night. A little while after, I get up and head over to the door, telling my friend I needed to use the bathroom. She jumps up, throws herself between me and the door, and is like, "You can't go out there. You'll wake up Grandpa." I tell her not to worry and that I'd creep down the hall on tippy toes so as not to wake him. But my friend still refuses to let me leave the room. I think she's actually playing around for a second. I'm like, "Quit it," and try to get past her, but she actually shoves me back away from the door with this angry look on her face. I didn't want to start a fight with her, after all. The whole objective was to keep as quiet as possible, but still I needed to use the bathroom. So I asked her where I'm going to go, and get this. She reaches under her bed and pulls out one of the plastic stationery trays. You know, like the inbox and outbox kind you put paper in? Yeah, that kind. She points at this paper tray and is just like, "Go in this." Again, I think she might be playing a weird and cruel sort of trick on me, but she's deadly serious. She actually wanted me to pee in that stationery tray. So I did. It was super gross, but I did it, and instantly, the mood is just destroyed. I had nothing to clean myself up with. I'm pretty sure I peed a little on my nightgown. It was just all kinds of disgusting. But still, my friend won't let me go to use the bathroom to wash up. The weirdest thing was, she acted like it was normal. She never did anything like that at my house, and she definitely didn't seem like that kind of kid, like she wasn't known as the stinky kid in school or whatever. The whole thing just kind of blew my mind, and although I didn't let it affect our relationship or friendship or anything, I definitely didn't like to stay over at her house again. We stayed close for a long time after, but ended up going to different high schools because she moved in with her aunt over in St. Paul. We kept in touch using MySpace, back when that was still a thing, but I never got to the bottom of her weird nocturnal bathroom habits, not until well after her grandpa passed away. When he died, she seemed to take it really bad. When I called her, she broke down crying so bad that she had to hang up, and she wouldn't return any of my texts, no matter how much I begged her to get in touch. In the end, me and my mom looked up her aunt's home phone number and called ahead before we drove over. The aunt seemed more than happy to talk to us, but with the caveat that she had something very serious to tell us. My friend's grandpa had been doing stuff to her. Whenever her grandma was asleep, she got up to use the bathroom or whatever, her grandpa would hear her come out of his room and, God, I can't even bring myself to say it. Turns out he'd done the exact same thing to her mom too, and that's like half the reason she wasn't in the picture anymore. One of the other reasons was the drug use, which is why no matter how much she insisted on custody not being given to the grandparents, a judge ignored her and did it anyway. I think they were just so terrified of him that they just couldn't talk about it, ever, and it was only after he died that it all came spilling out in various forms. The aunt that she was living with was her mom's cousin, so obviously wasn't around for what was happening when they were kids. It was absolutely horrifying hearing about it just as her friend, so I can only imagine how terrible the aunt felt, knowing she was so close to the abuse but just not being able to see it. And then it all made sense to me. Why she didn't want me walking down the hall at night. Why she'd taken to peeing in a stationery tray that she kept hidden under her bed. She wasn't being mean or weird when she made me do it. She was protecting me. No wonder she didn't want me to have this sleepover in her place, and I'm really not trying to make this whole thing about me when I say this, but I feel horribly guilty for not saying anything to my parents at the time. I didn't want to embarrass her. She was my friend, my best friend. But that's just the thing about being a kid, isn't it? That naivety. You do dumb stuff even if you don't mean to. And that's what my therapist tells me anyway, and I try to believe it. I really do. But part of me will forever remain convinced that somehow I'm kind of to blame, too. So, back when I was a kid, me and my best bud were having a sleepover. His mom and dad had gotten a divorce a couple months prior, so to counter all the stress of it, he pretty much got whatever he wanted. Not like his mom was spoiling him or anything, she was just being super nice to make sure he wasn't too bummed about his dad leaving. Did it work? Yes and no. Getting to have his friends sleep over, getting an Xbox, a cell phone, and getting much more personal freedom was all well and good, but every so often you could tell the whole thing was getting to him. The good thing was, I got to spend a whole bunch more time with him to give him the support we needed, which coincidentally meant that I was there for one of the worst moments of his childhood. Actually, make that both our childhoods. So, we're having a sleepover, and his mom is having a friend over. We're upstairs, they're downstairs. At one point, I wanted a glass of water, so I head downstairs, but you had to walk through the TV room to get to the kitchen, and when I do, I see my buddy's mom's friend is a dude, and they're getting kind of close, if you know what I'm saying. They jump off each other when I walk into the room. I walk through like, don't mind me, and it's incredibly awkward as I walk back through with my glass of water. Then, I make the mistake of mentioning it to my buddy. He's clearly not happy with the fact that it's a dude. Like, we're ninth graders at this point, so we're pretty savvy to, you know. Anyway, my buddy isn't happy, but he just does his usual thing of internalizing it before distracting himself. Not the best coping mechanism in hindsight, but it is what it is. Then, remember that cell phone I mentioned? Well, his mom bought it for him so he could keep in touch with his dad, which he then does. And guess what's the first thing he tells him? Yep, that there's a strange dude over at his house. I totally blame myself in the moment. It sucked so hard, and when my buddy hung up, turned to me with a smug grin and said, "Dad's on his way over." I just knew something bad was going to happen. I kind of wanted to leave, but at the same time, my whole reason for being at that time was being a good friend to Ryan. I had a really healthy family life at home. Like, my mom and dad were a loving, dedicated couple, right up until the day my dad passed. And I'd like to think they raised good kids. But Ryan, his parents were total morons. And good God, did that make me feel guilty. So, I stuck around. I knew something horrible was going to happen, but I had zero freaking clue to how bad it would really be. My buddy's bedroom window overlooked his driveway, so when his dad finally did show up, we could see and hear almost everything that went on down there. His dad, and I'm not embellishing here, hurtles up the driveway at like 40 miles an hour, screeches to a stop, and then doesn't even shut his door when he climbed out of his car. Ryan is watching him, looking at him like his dad is a knight in shining armor for a few seconds, right up until he says, "Oh crap, I think my dad has a gun." Hearing that final word sent this razor-sharp icicle running right through my guts. I knew there'd probably be shouting and fighting, but shooting? Then all we hear through an open window is, "Where is he?" It was Ryan's dad. He'd banged on the door until his mom answered, and then demanded to know where her guy friend was. Ryan's mom's all like, "I don't know what you're talking about." But then Ryan's dad goes from 0 to 100 in a second flat. "Don't lie to me, Linda, where is he?" he says. There's this very real, palpable pause, and me and Ryan are just on this very tense, nervous feeling. Then his mom says, "Who told you?" Again, shiver of ice through my stomach, because I'm basically the one who told, and in that moment, I told myself that whatever was about to happen was completely my fault. "See," Ryan's dad exploded at the admission. "You're a freaking liar, Linda. Now get out of my way." We could hear Ryan's mom screaming for a second. Then we heard another voice, only this one is definitely inside the house. The guy friend. "Get off!" he screamed. You heard the guy start to shout something at Ryan's dad. Then he just went totally silent, and all you could hear were feet beating against the floorboards downstairs. All before, bam, bam, bam. 3 distinct gunshots that echoed around the house. Me and Ryan are just bawling at this point, because we could still hear his mom screaming, and we had no idea if she'd been shot, if the boyfriend was dead, if the boyfriend had a gun and fired at Ryan's dad. The whole situation was traumatic enough, but the not knowing, man, that was just the worst. I had to grab Ryan's cell phone off of him to call 911. He just totally shut down from the stress. He'd had a rough enough few months while the whole divorce thing went on, then now he had to deal with potentially a dead mom or dad. I don't blame him, honestly. It was bad enough for me, and it wasn't even any of my parents. The 3 shots were all heard, and before the cops showed up, the only sounds we could hear were Ryan's mom crying downstairs. We should have gone to check on her. I know we should have, but the dispatcher told us both to stay put because we didn't know if there was still an active shooter or whatever, so we did as we were told. Thankfully, everyone turned out to be okay, and no one was even shot. Ryan's dad had aimed the gun at his mom's friend as soon as he'd laid eyes on him, but the guy was quick and just bolted out the back of the house as Ryan's dad pursued. He fired 3 shots, but it was basically just to scare the guy away at that point. And I heard none of the bullets even went near him. But still, it was terrifying, and Ryan's dad ended up going back to prison for a long while because of it.
I'm now a 32-year-old female, and at the time, this story took place when I was 13 years old. One night I was staying over at my friend's house, who, for the sake of this story, we'll call Kate. She lived in a really sketchy neighborhood that was just a few miles from our middle school. Her mom was a single mom and she was working late, so we kinda had the whole place to ourselves. Her mom had left the house full of junk food and she would let us rent movies on demand as much as we wanted. Since it was still bright out, we decided to go for a walk down by the pond and park area, just a couple blocks away from her house. As we were heading back to her house, just about 1 or 2 houses away, a car then approached us from behind. Now, I didn't recognize this person, but my friend Kate did. She said that it was her next door neighbor, Andy. Andy, if I can recall, looked to be much older, maybe in his early 50s. I remember him having a kind of grayish beard and he wore a baseball cap. He slowed his car down and he had asked what we were up to for the evening. Kay told him that her friend and her were having a sleepover and were probably going to prank call a few kids from our school and also stay up late watching scary movies. Andy just chuckled and smiled at the both of us, but even as a 13-year-old girl, I didn't really like the way he had smiled at us. I don't know this stranger, and I was really surprised my friend had even given this much information, but maybe she knew him a lot better. Andy then told us in a really low voice,
"Well, Kate, I see your mom's car isn't in the driveway, so I'm assuming she's working late again, huh?"
Kate had then said in her usual friendly but completely oblivious tone, "Yep, she has the late night shift again, so we get the house all to ourselves tonight." Andy returned that same creepy smile, then said,
Alright, well, you girls have fun at your little sleepover, and don't get into too much trouble tonight.
And then with that, he slowly drove past us and then pulled his car into his driveway. As we walked up our driveway, we saw Andy walk into his house, still staring over at us. Once we got inside Kate's house, I had started asking her about her neighbor. I told her that he sort of gave me the creeps. Kate said that she agreed he is sort of creepy, but she didn't really think he was any sort of danger or threat at all. Now, Kate was always more of the trusting, carefree type, while I seemed to always be the paranoid, more cautious goody-goody. So we made a pizza and we grabbed a bunch of snacks and started watching some movies, and we also had fun chatting with a few friends on AIM afterwards. Right around midnight or even 1 a.m., Kate's mom still wasn't home and we were just starting to fall asleep in our sleeping bags in the living room. The TV was still on and it was playing some kind of scary movie in the background. Suddenly, Kate had clicked the TV on mute, then lowered her voice. She then said to me, "I think I saw the motion detection light go off and on in our backyard." She then quietly got up to peek out the window overlooking their backyard. I very slowly tiptoed over to her and asked if she saw anything. She didn't see anything, but not too long afterwards, we then saw the light turn on. We really tried our best, but we couldn't really see anything outside. Kate decided to go into their basement and see if she could get a better look through the window down there. We crept down to the basement stairs, being very careful not to trip in the dark. We also didn't want to turn on the lights just in case whatever was out there would see us. I don't know why Kate was suddenly taking this so seriously since she was usually the more laid-back friend, but maybe we were just both being super paranoid from all the scary movies we were watching. I don't know. There was a very large window next to a door on the far side of the basement. The motion detection light turned on yet again, spilling in through the window so that we could see a little in the small basement. Suddenly we heard the door that was leading out to the backyard in the basement start to rattle. We both jumped and screamed. The window on the door was covered by a set of blinds, so we couldn't see who was on the other side, but we knew someone was definitely trying to open the door. Fortunately for us, it was locked with a deadbolt, but nonetheless, we were still scared shitless. Kay grabbed a baseball bat lying on top of a sofa and began edging towards the door. I whispered at her to get away and that we need to get out of here and maybe call her mom or the cops. But Kate, always being the more brave one, then very carefully lifted a corner of the blinds on the door window. Whoever was on the other side was still trying to get the door to open. Kate lifted the blinds, and lo and behold, it was her neighbor Andy. Kate and I both screamed. Andy just held his hands up in the air and then shouted,
Whoa, it's okay girls, I'm not going to hurt you. I just wanted to see if you're alright. It's really late, and I thought I saw someone running in your yard.
Kate and I both looked at each other and then at Andy. There was something so sick and menacing in his eyes, and we both just knew that he was definitely lying, and he was the one trying to break into Kate's house. Kate shouted back at him that he better get the hell out of here or she's going to call the police. Andy just sort of blinked at us and repeated he just wanted to check on us because he knew we were home alone. He grabbed the doorknob again and asked us to unlock the deadbolt. I pulled Kate by the arm and told her to call 911 immediately. I screamed that we were calling the police right now and he better get the hell out of here. Andy just kind of glared at us and then backed away from the door. He quickly looked to the right, then turned and ran to his backyard. Kate and I ran upstairs and her mom was walking into the house. She asked us what we were just doing in the basement, and we both frantically tried telling her what had happened with Andy. Her mom was very shocked but didn't think it would do anything to call the police since technically he didn't break in or hurt us. Kate and I were both really freaked out and we wanted her mom to call the police and report him, but she just kept insisting there was probably nothing they could do. Very fortunately, I didn't have any more encounters with Andy the few more times I'd go over to Kate's house, and not too long after, her and her mom moved away. I don't know what Andy was trying to do or what his intentions were that night, but I'm really glad we didn't find out.